The SEALs found nothing. The SAS found everyone. Operation Jubilee. When 2 elite units hit 2 caves, only one rescued the hostages. Afghanistan, May 28, 2012. Chapter 1. The unit that killed bin Laden. 1 year after they put 2 bullets into Osama bin Laden's skull, SEAL Team 6 was still the most famous special operations unit on Earth. The raid on Abbottabad had made them legends. Hollywood was making movies about them. Books were being written. Every military documentary, every news segment, every conversation about elite warriors inevitably circled back to the same unit, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU, the men who had ended the world's most wanted terrorist. They were, by every measure, the pinnacle of American special operations capability. Tier 1, the best of the best, the unit that got the missions too dangerous, too sensitive, too important for anyone else. So, when 4 humanitarian aid workers were kidnapped by bandits in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan in May 2012, and intelligence suggested they might be sold to the Taliban or executed, it made perfect sense to send SEAL Team 6. There was just one problem. The British had a citizen among the hostages, and the British had their own ideas about who should lead the rescue. The Special Air Service had been conducting hostage rescues since before most SEAL Team 6 operators were born. They had written the book on counterterrorism. They had trained half the world's elite units. And they had never forgotten that 2 years earlier, when American Special Forces had been tasked with rescuing a British hostage, they had killed her instead. This time would be different. This time, British operators would lead the way. Chapter 2. Taken. Helen Johnston was 28 years old, deeply religious, and utterly committed to helping people who had nothing. The British aid worker had been in Afghanistan for just over a year, working for MEDER, a Swiss humanitarian organization that operated in some of the most dangerous and impoverished regions on Earth. While other aid workers stayed in Kabul or the relatively secure northern cities, Johnston went where the need was greatest. Badakhshan Province, the far northeastern corner of Afghanistan, where the Hindu Kush Mountains rise toward the borders of Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. A land of stunning beauty and crushing poverty, where children starved in villages that had never seen a doctor, where pregnant women died in childbirth because the nearest hospital was a 3-day journey on horseback. Johnston had described the malnutrition she witnessed as Somalian-type skeletal children with distended bellies and hollow eyes, so wasted that they looked otherworldly. She knew the risks. Everyone who worked in these regions knew the risks. But she also knew that without people willing to accept those risks, the children would continue to die. In interviews before her kidnapping, Johnston had spoken about the challenges of working in Afghanistan, the constant security concerns, the restrictions on movement, the need to be covered up and escorted whenever she went outside. It was grueling, she admitted, cold, damp, and miserable much of the time. But she stayed. "There is no doubt that there is a fundamental need for us to be here," she had said. "Too many children are suffering for us not to be." On May 22, 2012, Johnston and 3 colleagues set out on horseback to visit relief project sites in the remote Shari Buzurg district. The terrain was too rugged for vehicles. The only way in was on foot or by horse, following narrow mountain trails that wound through valleys, still recovering from devastating floods. With her was Maragwa Oirere, a 26-year-old Kenyan medic. 2 Afghan women who worked as local staff for MEDER accompanied them as guides and translators. 4 women, unarmed, carrying medical supplies and food for children. They never reached their destination. Armed men emerged from the rocks along the trail. Not Taliban, not exactly. These were bandits, criminals who operated in the lawless mountain regions where the Afghan government's authority existed only on paper. Drug runners, kidnappers. Men who had learned that foreign aid workers were worth more as hostages than as corpses. They had heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, AK-47 assault rifles. Whatever their criminal origins, they were heavily armed and clearly prepared for violence. The 4 women were seized at gunpoint, their horses taken, their supplies scattered. Within hours, they had disappeared into the vast wilderness of the Koi Laram forest. One of the Afghan women managed to escape during the initial chaos. She made her way to a village and raised the alarm. But by then, the kidnappers had vanished with their 3 remaining hostages. The hunt had begun. Within hours, the British embassy in Kabul was notified. A British citizen had been taken. The Foreign Office in London was alerted. Madaire's headquarters in Switzerland began crisis protocols. The Afghan government, such as it existed in these remote regions, was informed. But in truth, nobody on the government side had any idea where the hostages had been taken. Badakhshan province covers over 17,000 square miles of some of the most rugged terrain on Earth. The kidnappers could be anywhere in caves, in villages, moving constantly through mountain passes that government forces had never mapped. Finding 4 women in that wilderness would require capabilities beyond anything the Afghan security forces possessed. Chapter 3. The Demands. The kidnappers made contact within days. Their demands were ambitious. Millions of dollars in ransom, the release of a notorious drug dealer from Afghan custody, safe passage to Pakistan. They knew exactly what they had: a British citizen whose government would pay dearly to get her back. At least, that's what they assumed. The British government's position on hostage ransoms was absolute. They didn't pay them. They didn't negotiate for prisoner releases. They didn't reward kidnapping with capitulation. This wasn't cruelty. It was mathematics. Every ransom paid funded the next kidnapping. Every prisoner traded encouraged more hostage-taking. The British had learned this lesson in Northern Ireland, in Iraq, in a dozen other conflicts where negotiating with terrorists only produced more terrorism. But refusing to pay ransoms didn't mean abandoning citizens. It meant finding another way. In London, the government's emergency committee known as COBRA convened. Every day since the kidnapping, senior officials had gathered to review the situation, assess options, and coordinate with intelligence agencies. COBRA, named after the Cabinet Office briefing room where it meets, handles Britain's most serious crises: terrorist attacks, natural disasters, hostage situations. The committee brings together ministers, military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and diplomats to coordinate the government's response. Prime Minister David Cameron chaired 3 of the COBRA meetings personally. The Foreign Secretary was present. The Defense Secretary provided military options. The head of MI6 offered intelligence assessments. The stakes were clear. If the hostages couldn't be located and rescued, they would likely be sold to the Taliban. And the Taliban didn't negotiate. The Taliban made videos. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Badakhshan, the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in human history was being focused on a handful of bandits hiding in caves. Signal intercept teams from GCHQ, Britain's equivalent of the NSA, began monitoring every communication in the region. The kidnappers were using mobile phones to coordinate with potential buyers, to communicate their demands, to arrange logistics. Every call was captured. Every text was logged. Every ping from every phone was triangulated. High-altitude unmanned aerial vehicles, drones that could loiter at 60,000 feet for days at a time, began constant surveillance patterns over the Koilaram forest. Their cameras could read license plates from the stratosphere. They could detect heat signatures through forest canopy. They could track movement patterns and identify individuals. The intelligence picture came together piece by piece. The kidnappers were identified. Their location was narrowed down. Their routines were mapped. And then came the intercept that changed everything. A member of the Taliban was overheard in a mobile phone conversation, pressuring the kidnappers to make a show of intent. In the world of hostage-taking, those words had only one meaning: execute someone on camera. The Taliban had done this before. They had filmed the beheadings of hostages, the executions of captured soldiers, the brutal murders of anyone they considered an enemy of their cause. Those videos were distributed across the internet, used as recruitment tools and warnings. If the kidnappers followed through, if they made their show of intent, Helen Johnston would die on camera, her final moments broadcast to the world as propaganda for men who considered her presence in their country an unforgivable sin. The window for negotiation had just slammed shut. Chapter 4. The Ghost of Linda Norgrove. The decision to launch a rescue mission was not made lightly. Everyone in COBRA remembered Linda Norgrove. 2 years earlier, in October 2010, another British aid worker had been kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan's Kunar province. Norgrove was 36 years old, a Scottish woman who had dedicated her life to helping Afghan communities recover from decades of war. When negotiations stalled and intelligence suggested she might be moved or killed, the Americans were asked to mount a rescue. SEAL Team 6 was deployed, the same unit, the same capabilities, the same confidence that had carried them through dozens of successful operations. The raid went wrong almost immediately. The SEALs approached the compound where Norgrove was held and came under fire. In the chaos of the assault, one of the operators threw a fragmentation grenade toward a group of enemy fighters. Linda Norgrove was in the same room. The grenade killed her. Initially, the Americans reported that Norgrove had been killed by her captors during the rescue attempt. It was only later, after reviewing helmet camera footage, that the truth emerged. The British hostage had been killed by American-friendly fire. The revelation was devastating. A rescue mission launched to save a British citizen had instead killed her. The very unit tasked with bringing her home had ended her life. The SEALs maintained that the grenade throw was justified, that the operator didn't know Norgrove was present, that he was engaging enemy fighters in a fluid combat situation. The investigation concluded that no criminal charges were warranted, but the stain remained. In the special operations community, Linda Norgrove's death became a cautionary tale about the limits of American aggression. The SEALs were superb killers, nobody disputed that. But hostage rescue required a different skill set. It required the ability to distinguish friend from foe in fractions of a second. It required restraint in situations where every instinct screamed to throw grenades and shoot first. The British remembered. They would not forget. Now, 2 years later, with another British hostage in danger, the same questions arose. Who would conduct the rescue? Who would take responsibility if it failed? Who could be trusted to bring Helen Johnston home alive? The Americans offered SEAL Team 6 again. They were already in theater. They had the helicopters, the intelligence support, the quick reaction capability. But the British had their own ideas. If a British citizen was going to be rescued, British Special Forces would lead the way. Chapter 5. 2 Caves. By midweek, the intelligence picture had crystallized, and it presented a problem. The hostages had been split up. Signal intercepts and drone surveillance had located the kidnappers in the Koh-i Laram forest, a dense and mountainous region in Badakhshan's Shari Buzurg district. The terrain was brutal, thick forest, steep slopes, limited approach routes that could be easily defended. The kidnappers were holding the hostages in caves, not one cave, but 2, separated by a significant distance. Intelligence suggested that Helen Johnston and Moragwa Oarere were in one location, while the 2 Afghan women were in another. This complicated everything. A single assault team couldn't hit both locations simultaneously. If they attacked one cave first, the sound of gunfire would alert the guards at the other. The remaining hostages would be killed before rescuers could reach them. The only solution was a coordinated simultaneous assault. 2 teams, 2 caves, 1 moment. Perfect synchronization. It would require the best operators in the world. The plan came together quickly. A joint British-American force would be deployed. The SAS would provide 1 assault team. SEAL Team 6 DevGru would provide the other. Both teams would be inserted by American helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, whose motto was "Night Stalkers Don't Quit." Approximately 70 Special Operations personnel assembled at a forward operating base in Badakhshan province. MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters and Apache gunship escorts stood ready. Intelligence officers provided final briefings. Assault teams rehearsed their movements. On Friday afternoon, General John Allen, the American commander of ISAF forces in Afghanistan, contacted Prime Minister Cameron directly. The time had come. The hostages were in imminent danger. The rescue force was ready. Cameron gave authorization. The plan was simple in concept, extraordinarily difficult in execution. The helicopters would insert both teams at a landing zone, approximately 2 kilometers from the target locations. The operators would then patrol on foot through the forest in total darkness, moving silently through enemy-held territory, navigating by GPS and night vision. When they reached their assault positions, they would establish a security cordon around both caves. Then, on a synchronized signal, both teams would breach simultaneously. Speed, violence of action, overwhelming force applied in a fraction of a second. Before the kidnappers could react, the hostages would either be free or dead. The plan had dozens of potential failure points. The helicopter insertion could be detected. The patrol through the forest could be compromised. The synchronization between teams could fail. The hostages could be executed before operators could reach them. And there was always the possibility that the intelligence was wrong, that the hostages weren't where the analysts believed them to be. But every hour of delay increased the risk that the Taliban's show of intent would become reality. Every hour of negotiation was another hour the kidnappers might decide to cut their losses and kill their captives. It was time to act. Chapter 6. Into the darkness. The helicopters lifted off in the early hours of May 28th. The MH-60M Blackhawks flew low and fast, their engines screaming as they hugged the terrain to avoid detection. The pilots from the 160th SOR had trained for exactly this kind of mission, inserting special operations teams into hostile territory under the worst possible conditions. Above them, Apache attack helicopters provided overwatch, their sensors scanning the forest below for any sign of enemy activity. Predator drones circled at high altitude, feeding real-time video back to command centers where generals and politicians watched the operation unfold. Inside the Blackhawks, 24 SAS operators sat in silence, their faces blackened, their weapons ready. Across from them, a similar number of DEVGRU SEALs made their own final preparations. These were the elite of the elite, men who had survived selection processes designed to break the human body and mind, men who had spent years training for exactly this moment, the close-quarters battle where fractions of a second meant the difference between success and catastrophe. The SAS operators carried their preferred weapons, C8 carbines with suppressors, Glock pistols, flashbang grenades. Their plate carriers held magazines, medical kits, radios. Night vision goggles mounted on tactical helmets gave them superhuman sight in the darkness. Each operator knew exactly what he was carrying and why. Years of experience had taught them what worked in close-quarters battle and what didn't. Their loadouts were customized to personal preference, refined through hundreds of training exercises and real-world operations. The DevGRU operators were similarly equipped. HK-416 assault rifles, Sig Sauer pistols, the cutting edge of American special operations technology. In terms of equipment, both teams were evenly matched. The same night vision, the same body armor, the same communications gear. Whatever differences existed between them would come down to training, tactics, and luck. Both teams knew the stakes. Both teams understood that 4 innocent women were counting on them. Both teams had trained their entire careers for this. The helicopters flared at the landing zone, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled in the rotor wash. The operators fast roped down, hitting the ground running, immediately dispersing into the forest to establish security. The Blackhawks banked away into the night, their noise fading until only silence remained. 2 kilometers of forest lay between the operators and their objectives. 2 kilometers of steep terrain, dense vegetation, and unknown enemy positions. 2 kilometers that had to be covered in total silence, with no light except what filtered through their night vision. The patrol moved out in 2 columns. The SAS team angled toward the cave where intelligence suggested Helen Johnston and Moragua Orere were being held. The DevGRU team moved toward the other location. Step by careful step, they advanced through the darkness. Every twig snap was a potential compromise. Every shadow could hide an enemy sentry. The forest around them was alive with sounds, animals moving, wind rustling leaves, water trickling somewhere in the distance. Hours passed. The operators maintained spacing, communicated with hand signals, moved with the fluid precision that only came from years of training together. The SAS operators had done this before more times than any of them could count. Night patrols through hostile territory had been their bread and butter in Northern Ireland, in the Balkans, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They knew how to move silently through darkness. They knew how to read the terrain, how to sense danger before it materialized. The DEVGRU operators were similarly experienced. They had hunted Taliban leaders across these mountains for years. They had conducted countless night raids, countless insertions, countless missions where everything depended on reaching the target without being detected. Both teams were the best in the world at what they did, but only one team would find what they were looking for. Finally, as the first hints of pre-dawn light began to touch the eastern sky, both teams reached their assault positions. The caves were visible now, dark openings in the mountainside, barely distinguishable from the surrounding rock. No lights, No visible guards, no indication that anyone inside knew death was waiting in the shadows. The assault teams established security cordons. Snipers found positions with clear fields of fire. Breachers moved to their entry points. Radio silence broke with a single word: execute. The word crackled through encrypted radios to both assault teams. This was the moment. Everything they had trained for, every selection course endured, every hour spent in kill houses practicing room clearances, it all came down to the next 60 seconds. Two teams moved simultaneously. Two caves, one outcome that would echo through Special Operations history. Chapter 7: The Assault. Both teams hit their targets at the exact same moment. Flashbang grenades detonated inside the caves, blinding light and deafening noise designed to disorient anyone inside. The concussive force would leave victims temporarily deaf, blind, and unable to coordinate resistance. The operators flowed in behind the grenades, weapons up, moving with the choreographed precision of men who had rehearsed these movements thousands of times. In the Devgru cave, the SEALs encountered immediate resistance. Gunmen emerged from the darkness, weapons firing, muzzle flashes strobing in the confined space. The SEALs engaged with overwhelming firepower, suppressed rifles spitting rounds at cyclic rate, every shot aimed, every target dropping. 7 bandits died in the first seconds of the assault. They had no chance. The SEALs were faster, better trained, better equipped. The kidnappers went from sleeping to dead before they could process what was happening. The cave was cleared in under a minute. The SEALs swept through every chamber, checking every corner, ensuring no threats remained. 7 enemy killed in action. 0 hostages found. The cave was empty of prisoners. The intelligence had been wrong, or the hostages had been moved, or they had simply hit the wrong location. Whatever the reason, the SEALs had conducted a flawless tactical assault and rescued nobody. The operators swept through the cave one more time, checking every alcove, every shadow, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. The hostages simply weren't there. Radio traffic crackled. The Devgru team leader reported the situation. Objective secured. 7 enemy Kia. No hostages found. The words hung in the air like a question mark. Where were the hostages? The answer came seconds later from the other cave. Meanwhile, 2 kilometers away, the SAS was making history. The British operators breached their cave with the same speed and violence as their American counterparts. Flashbangs first, then the assault team, weapons tracking, clearing corners, neutralizing threats. 4 bandits were inside. They reached for weapons and died with their hands still moving. The SAS didn't give second chances. The operators fired controlled pairs 2 rounds center mass and moved on before the bodies hit the ground. And there, in the back of the cave, huddled against the rock wall, were 4 women. Helen Johnston, Maragwa Orere, 2 Afghan colleagues, all 4 hostages, alive and unharmed. The intelligence had placed them in the wrong locations. The 2 foreign women and the 2 Afghan women weren't separated at all. They had been held together the entire time. The SAS had hit the right cave. The SEALs had hit the wrong one. The SAS operators moved quickly to secure the hostages. Medical personnel checked for injuries. Security teams maintained perimeter. The women were frightened, disoriented from the flashbangs, but physically unharmed. 12 days of captivity. 12 days of uncertainty and fear. 12 days of not knowing if they would live or die. Helen Johnston looked up at the masked figures who had just killed her captors. She couldn't see their faces behind the night vision goggles and balaclavas. She couldn't know which country they came from, which unit they served, but she could see the Union Jack patch on one operator's shoulder. British. They were British. "You're safe now," a voice said in an English accent. "We're taking you home." It was over in less than 60 seconds. The radio crackled with the words every operator lives to hear. Precious cargo secured. All hostages recovered. No friendly casualties. Chapter 8. The Extraction. The Black Hawks returned as the sun rose over the mountains. The operators collapsed their security perimeter in sequence, bounding back to the landing zone in disciplined movements. The hostages were escorted carefully, SAS personnel on all sides, weapons facing outward against any remaining threat. The SEALs extracted from their cave and linked up with the main force. There were no recriminations, no awkward silences. Both teams had executed their missions flawlessly. The fact that all the hostages happened to be in one location rather than two was intelligence failure, not operational failure, but the result spoke for itself. 7 enemy killed by DevGru, 0 hostages rescued. 4 enemy killed by the SAS. All 4 hostages recovered. The helicopters lifted off and banked toward the British embassy in Kabul. The hostages were wrapped in blankets, given water, checked by medics. They were in shock, struggling to process the violence of their rescue, but they were alive. Helen Johnston's first call was to her parents in Britain. Philip, Patricia, and her brother Peter had been living in agony for 12 days, not knowing if they would ever see her again. The relief in their voices was overwhelming. "We are delighted and hugely relieved by the wonderful news that Helen and all her colleagues have been freed," the Johnston family said in a statement. "We are deeply grateful to everyone involved in her rescue, to those who worked tirelessly on her behalf, and to family and friends for their love, prayers, and support over the last 12 days. In Kenya, Moragwa Oerere's parents expressed similar gratitude. "We are greatly happy that the ordeal our daughter has gone through is over," they said. "Thanks to all those that have worked tirelessly and brought this to a safe conclusion. We specifically want to thank the British government, the Kenyan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Madeira in Switzerland, and all the people who have been praying for Moragwa's safe release." Madeira, the aid organization that employed all 4 hostages, expressed immense relief. "We are delighted and hugely relieved," a spokesman said. Madeira is immensely grateful to all parties involved in ensuring their swift and safe return. In London, Prime Minister David Cameron was woken at 2 in the morning with the news. The operation had been a complete success. All hostages recovered. No friendly casualties. Cameron's statement to the press came hours later, delivered outside 10 Downing Street. "It was an extraordinarily brave, breathtaking even, operation that our troops had to carry out," he said. "We will never be able to publish their names, but the whole country should know we have an extraordinary group of people who work for us, who do amazingly brave things." Then came the warning delivered directly to anyone considering future kidnappings of British citizens. "They should know if they take British citizens as hostage, we do not pay ransoms. We do not trade prisoners. They can expect a swift and brutal end." The message was clear. Take a British citizen, and the SAS would come for you. It was a deliberate contrast to the American approach. The United States negotiated. They paid ransoms through intermediaries. They made deals to recover their citizens. The British sent the SAS. The difference in philosophy was fundamental. The Americans believed that bringing citizens home by any means necessary was the priority. The British believed that paying ransoms only encouraged more kidnappings, only funded more terrorism, only put more citizens at risk. Better to send a message: kidnap a British citizen and you will die. On that night in Badakhshan, 11 kidnappers learned that lesson the hard way. 4 of them were killed by the SAS. 7 were killed by the SEALs. None of them would kidnap anyone ever again. Chapter 9. The Comparison. In the Special Operations community, Operation Jubilee became a case study in the differences between American and British approaches to hostage rescue. The Americans came out of the Vietnam era. SEAL Team 6 was built by Richard Marcinko, a man who spent his career terrorizing the Viet Cong and brought that aggressive mentality to counter-terrorism. The SEALs were assault-focused, violence-forward, trained to overwhelm opposition through superior firepower and speed. This approach had served them well in countless operations. The killing of Osama bin Laden was a masterpiece of aggressive action, fast roping onto a compound, fighting through resistance, putting rounds into the target. The SEALs were magnificent killers, but hostage rescue wasn't the same as targeted killing. Charlie Beckwith, the founder of Delta Force, had spent years on exchange with the British SAS before returning to America to build the Army's counter-terrorism unit. He had absorbed the SAS philosophy, the emphasis on precision over firepower, the focus on saving hostages rather than simply eliminating threats. The SAS had been conducting hostage rescues since the 1970s. The Iranian embassy siege in 1980 had been their defining moment. 6 days of tension, 17 hostages, 26 Iranian terrorists. Resolved in exactly 17 minutes by SAS operators who killed 5 of 6 gunmen and rescued all but 1 hostage. That operation had been broadcast live on British television. The world watched masked figures in black abseil down the embassy walls, breaching windows with explosive charges, moving through the building with surgical precision. It became the template for every counter-terrorism unit that followed. Every elite unit in the world studied that operation. SEAL Team 6 studied it. Delta Force studied it. GSG-9 studied it. GIGN studied it. The SAS had shown what was possible when training, tactics, and courage came together in a moment of crisis. 3 decades later, the lesson still held. The SAS trained differently than the SEALs. Their close-quarters battle drills emphasized target discrimination, the ability to distinguish between hostage and hostage-taker in fractions of a second. They practiced with live hostages in their kill houses, building the neural pathways that would keep innocent people alive when everything happened at once. They also thought differently. The SAS had grown out of the World War II Special Air Service, a unit built for deep reconnaissance and unconventional warfare. Patience and precision were embedded in their DNA. They could spend weeks observing a target, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The SEALs, by contrast, were creatures of speed. Get in, get it done, get out. The longer an operation took, the more things could go wrong. Both philosophies had merit. Both had produced spectacular successes. But in Operation Jubilee, when the goal was bringing hostages home alive rather than putting bullets into bad guys, the SAS approach had proven superior. By any measure of lethal effectiveness, the SEALs had outperformed the British. They had killed more enemy fighters. They had cleared their objective with textbook precision. But the mission wasn't about killing. The mission was about rescue. And on that metric, only one team delivered. Some would argue that the comparison was unfair. The hostages happened to be in the SAS cave, not the SEAL cave. If the intelligence had been different, if the hostages had been split as originally believed, the SEALs might have rescued their share. But that argument missed the point. The SAS had been given the cave with the British hostage. Whether this was deliberate, whether the British had insisted on leading the assault where their citizen was believed to be held, or simply coincidence, the result was the same. When it mattered most, British operators had rescued a British citizen. The Americans had been given a secondary role and had found nothing. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Chapter 10, The Lesson. Operation Jubilee matters beyond the immediate tactical success. It demonstrated that reputation doesn't determine results. SEAL Team 6 came into this operation as the most famous special operations unit in the world. They had killed bin Laden. They had been the subject of movies, books, and endless media coverage. They were, in the public imagination, unbeatable. The SAS came into this operation the same way they approached everything: quietly, professionally, without fanfare. Their operators couldn't give interviews. Their missions remained classified. Their successes were never publicly acknowledged. When the dust settled, reputation meant nothing. The unit that sought no glory achieved all of it. The unit that had become synonymous with elite performance hit an empty cave. It demonstrated that history matters. The ghost of Linda Norgrove hung over every decision in this operation. 2 years earlier, the SEALs had been given the lead on a British hostage rescue, and the hostage died from American-friendly fire. That failure informed everything that followed. When Operation Jubilee was planned, the British insisted on leading the assault on the cave where Helen Johnston was believed to be held. Whether this was coincidence or deliberate choice, the result was that British operators rescued the British hostage. The SEALs were given the other cave, the one that turned out to be empty. Their tactical execution was flawless, but the hostages simply weren't there. It demonstrated that different units have different strengths. The SEALs are magnificent direct action operators. When the mission is kill or capture, when the objective is eliminating a high-value target, when violence is the answer, DevGru is among the best in the world. They had proven this over and over. The bin Laden raid, the rescue of Captain Phillips from Somali pirates, countless operations that never made the news but changed the course of the war on terror. But hostage rescue is a different discipline. It requires a different mindset, different training, different priorities. The SAS has been doing this longer than almost any unit on Earth. Their experience showed. When British operators breached that cave in Badakhshan, they weren't just executing a tactical plan. They were drawing on 70 years of institutional knowledge about how to save lives under fire. They were applying lessons learned from dozens of hostage rescues in countries around the world. and it demonstrated that the British remain capable of punching far above their weight. The United States military dwarfs Britain's in size, budget, and global reach. American Special Operations Command has more personnel than some countries' entire armies. The technology gap grows wider every year. But when it came time to rescue hostages from a cave in Afghanistan, the unit that got the job done wasn't the one with the biggest budget or the most famous name. It was the unit that had been doing this since 1941. The SAS had been conducting special operations for over 70 years by the time Operation Jubilee was launched. Their institutional knowledge ran deeper than any other unit in the world. They had learned lessons in World War II, in Malaya, in Borneo, in Oman, in Northern Ireland, in the Falklands, in the Gulf War, in Sierra Leone, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. 7 decades of combat experience had been distilled into their training, their tactics, their approach to hostage rescue. They didn't need to be famous. They didn't need movies made about them. They simply needed to be effective. On May 28, 2012, they proved they still were. Epilogue. Who dares wins. Helen Johnston returned to Britain and was reunited with her family. She had spent 12 days in captivity, not knowing if each moment would be her last. She had been held in a cave by armed criminals who had threatened to sell her to the Taliban. She had endured conditions that would have broken most people. But she was alive. She was free. And she owed her life to men whose names she would never know. Maragwa Oirere returned to Kenya, where her parents expressed their overwhelming gratitude to everyone involved in the rescue. The 2 Afghan women returned to their families in Badakhshan, their identities protected by their government. The SAS operators who conducted the rescue returned to their base at Hereford, their identities unknown, their faces never shown. They received no public recognition, no medals ceremonies on television, no Hollywood contracts. That's not the SAS way. The DEVGRU operators returned to their compound at Dam Neck, Virginia, where they continued training for the next mission. Despite hitting the empty cave, they had performed flawlessly. 7 enemy killed, 0 friendly casualties. The tactical execution was perfect, even if the intelligence was wrong. Both units would go on to conduct hundreds more operations in the years that followed. SEAL Team 6 would continue to be America's premier counterterrorism force. The SAS would continue to operate in the shadows, their missions unknown, their operators anonymous. But in the quiet conversations that happen in special operations communities around the world, Operation Jubilee became a benchmark. 2 caves, 2 teams, the same mission. One found nothing, one found everyone. It was the kind of comparison that cut through all the publicity, all the movies, all the books written by former operators seeking to cash in on their service. When it mattered most, when innocent lives hung in the balance, the SAS had delivered. The unit that killed bin Laden was famous. The unit that rescued Helen Johnston was effective. In the special operations world, only one of those things matters. David Cameron had warned that anyone who took British citizens hostage could expect a swift and brutal end. On that night in Badakhshan, the SAS delivered on that promise. The kidnappers were dead. The hostages were free. The message was sent. The motto of the Special Air Service is 3 simple words: who dares wins. On May 28, 2012, in a cave in the mountains of Afghanistan, they proved those words true once again. The SEALs found nothing. The SAS found everyone. Who dares wins.